bowling is a healthful recreation that the whole family can take part in and enjoy together all year round.
If you were part of a family in America in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, there is a good chance that one night a week belonged to the Lanes. You had a shirt with your name stitched over the pocket and your team's name across the back. You saw the same familiar faces every week. There was the clatter of falling pins, the smell of pizza and beer, the roar when somebody rolled a strike. It was League Night, and it was one of the great rituals of American life. At its peak, this country had around 12,000 bowling centers, and over 50 million Americans bowled. Professional bowling was one of the highest-rated sports on television, and the top bowlers were household names, as famous as ballplayers. Bowling was, for a while, the great pastime of the American common man and woman. And then the lanes started going dark. Today, from a peak of about 12,000, there are fewer than 4,000 bowling centers left in America. Thousands of them bulldozed. Now, most people, if you ask them what happened, will tell you the obvious thing. Americans just stopped bowling. And that is completely wrong. In fact, and this is the strangest part of the whole story, more Americans bowl today than at the height of the golden age. What died was not bowling. This is the story of the rise and fall of American bowling. And by the end, I will show you what actually collapsed and what it quietly tells us about America itself. To understand how big it became, you first have to understand how low it started, because before the boom, bowling had a bad reputation. It was a game of smoky rooms and saloons, of gambling and rough characters, not the sort of place a respectable family took the children. And part of the reason was the pins. Back then, at the end of every lane, there was a boy. They called them Pinboys, teenagers who crouched in the pit, and after every roll, scrambled down to pick up the fallen pins and set them back up by hand, all while dodging flying pins and hurtling balls. It was slow, it was dangerous, and it kept bowling small and a little disreputable. And then came the single invention that changed everything. In the years after the Second World War, an engineer named Gottfried Schmidt built a machine that could do the pinboy's job, automatically sweeping away the fallen pins and setting up a fresh rack all by itself. His invention was picked up by a company called AMF, the American Machine and Foundry, which, of all things, had made its name building machines that rolled cigarettes. In 1952, the first fully automatic pin setter went into commercial service. A few years later, in 1956, the Brunswick Company, an old maker of billiard tables, rolled out its own machine. And the two giants went to war, in what the industry called the pin setter wars, each of them financing thousands of new bowling lanes all across the country. And that little machine did three enormous things. The first was that it made bowling clean. With the Pinboys gone, the seedy image of the smoky bowling hall began to fade. The game became faster, cheaper to run, and reliable enough to stay open all day and all night. The second, and the most important, was that it turned bowling into family entertainment. Freed from the old reputation, a whole new kind of bowling center rose up across America. Bright, glamorous places with names like the Bowl-O-Drome, built right in the new shopping plazas. They had cocktail lounges for the adults, and nurseries where you could leave the children, and air conditioning, and gleaming formica everywhere. Women took up the game in enormous numbers. The count of women bowlers exploded from around 82,000 in 1946 to 6 million by 1960. Youth leagues took off. The whole family could go. And the third thing was that television made it a spectacle. The Professional Bowlers Association was founded in 1958, and the Pro Bowlers Tour became appointment viewing on Saturday afternoons, one of the highest-rated sports on all of American television. Top bowlers became genuine celebrities. Baseball legends like Mickey Mantle and Yogi Berra put their money into bowling alleys. The game had gone from the saloon to the center of American leisure. The numbers tell the story of the boom. In 1955, there were about 6,000 bowling centers in America. By the mid-1960s, there were around 12,000. The number of league bowlers climbed from under 3 million to over 7 million. And if you were there, you remember it your own league night, the shirt with your name on it, the same teammates week after week, year after year, the pitchers of beer, and the standings taped to the wall. But here is the thing you have to understand about the golden age of bowling, because it is the key to everything that follows. It was never really about the sport. It was about the league. It was about the ritual of it, the standing weekly appointment, belonging to a team, seeing the same people every single week. And that is where the money was, too. A bowling alley never made its fortune on the game itself, on the rented shoes and the lane time. It made its fortune on everything a league night sold around the game. The beer, the fries, the pizzas, ordered by committed regulars, week after week after week. A river of guaranteed business. And that river kept rising. League bowling climbed all the way through the 1970s, until, at the end of that decade, it reached its all-time peak, nearly 10 million Americans bowling in organized leagues. From the outside, it looked as though league night would be part of American life forever. But it was already beginning to slip. And the reason is the thing that almost everyone gets wrong. Now, the first crack was a business mistake. AMF in Brunswick had built and financed lanes absolutely everywhere, betting that league bowling would grow without end. By the mid-1960s, they had overbuilt too many lanes, chasing a market that had stopped expanding, and the bubble burst, leaving heavy losses behind. But that was just a tremor. The real earthquake was much slower, and it had almost nothing to do with bowling. It had to do with the way Americans were beginning to live. Because starting around 1980, the leagues began to empty out, and it happened for three reasons. The first was that women went to work. For decades, a huge part of the backbone of league bowling had been women, often homemakers with a standing weekly game, daytime and evening leagues full of familiar faces. But as millions of American women entered the workforce through the 1970s and 80s, that free weekly slot simply disappeared. There was no longer an afternoon or an evening to give to a league. The second reason was that the living room started winning. Cable television exploded from a handful of channels into hundreds. Video games arrived, and then, in time, the internet. The evening that had once belonged to the lanes now had 1,000 competitors, all of them waiting at home, requiring nothing of you, no team to join, no night to commit to. And the third reason was cold real estate math. A bowling alley is enormous. It sits on a huge footprint of land, often 20,000 to 40,000 square feet of prime commercial property. And as land values climbed through the decades, that footprint became worth far more as a shopping center, or a parking lot, or an apartment block than it was ever worth as a bowling alley. So the owners sold, and the wrecking balls came, and the lanes were paved over. And when you add all of that up, you would naturally expect that bowling itself had collapsed, but it had not. And this is the discovery that everyone gets wrong. In the year 2000, a scholar at Harvard named Robert Putnam noticed something that stopped him cold. Between 1980 and the early 1990s, the total number of Americans who went bowling actually went up by about 10%. But over that very same period, the number who bowled in organized leagues fell by about 40%. Read that again, because it is the whole story in a single sentence. Americans had not stopped bowling. They had stopped bowling together. And that is precisely what broke the industry. Remember where the money was not in the shoes and the lane time, but in the beer and the pizza that a committed league bought, week after week. A person who bowls in a league spends roughly 3 times as much on food and drink as someone who wanders in once on a Friday night. So even as casual bowlers drifted in and out, the guaranteed river of league business dried up, and the economics that had built 12,000 alleys quietly stopped working. Putnam saw something even larger in it. The collapse of league bowling, he argued, was a symptom of a much bigger retreat happening all across the country. Americans joining fewer clubs and lodges, knowing their neighbors less, spending more of their lives alone. He made it the title of his famous book, Bowling Alone. Now, some scholars pushed back and argued that American community was not vanishing so much as changing its shape. But the bowling numbers themselves were very hard to argue with, because the truth underneath them is simple and a little sad. The bowling alley was never really selling a game. It was selling a place to belong, a standing weekly date, with the same faces, a team, a small and reliable community. And as American life filled up and moved indoors and grew more private, the appetite for showing up every single week for a group you belonged to quietly faded. What emptied out of those alleys was not the sport. It was the togetherness the sport had been holding together. The numbers of the fall are staggering. From that peak of nearly 10 million league bowlers at the end of the 1970s, the figure has fallen to only about 1 million today, a collapse of nearly 90%. The bowling centers went from around 12,000 in the mid-1960s to under 4,000. One by one, the neighborhood lanes went dark. The bolodromes with their formica and their cocktail lounges and their dusty team trophies behind the counter hauled away to make room for a strip mall or a parking lot. The industry did survive, though, by reinventing itself one more time. The old giants consolidated into a single large company and turned bowling into something new, an upscale night out, with dim lighting and cocktails and arcade games, a place you go once in a while for a birthday party or a date. And on that score, bowling is doing just fine. But the thing that once filled 12,000 alleys, the weekly league, the standing Tuesday night, the team you belonged to for 20 years, that is mostly gone. So let me be clear. Bowling is not dead. Walk into a modern center on a weekend and it is packed and loud and a great deal of fun. But it is a different thing now. It is a night out, not a way of life. The shirt with your name on it, the same 8 faces every week for 2 decades, the league standings taped to the wall that has quietly faded out of most of America. So what do we take from all of this? There are business lessons here about overbuilding and about a whole industry misreading its own future. But for me, the lesson that stays is something much bigger than bowling. Because what the golden age really was, underneath the pins and the beer, was one of the great excuses Americans once had to see the same people, on purpose, every single week. When you went to league night, you were not just knocking down pins. You were showing up for your team, for your neighbors, for a standing appointment with other human beings. And as our lives grew busier and more private and more comfortable at home, that simple habit of showing up for a league, a lodge, a club, a church group slowly, quietly thinned away. Bowling did not lose to a better game. It lost to a lonelier way of living. And here's the part that stays with me most. More Americans bowl today than ever before in history. We have not lost the game at all. We have only lost the reason to come back next Tuesday, to the same lane, to the same friends, and do it all again. Now, I would love to hear from you. Were you in a bowling league? Do you remember your team's name, or the shirt, or the friends you only ever saw on league night? What was your best game? Leave a comment below and share the memory. And if this one took you back, take a moment to subscribe, because here on this channel, we tell these stories one at a time. After all, every empire has its rise, and every rise has its fall.